I feel very, very strongly that Williams Tavern truly is a lost treasure of Marlborough. It's probably the most historic property that we had in this city in all the years, maybe in the whole area. And I hope that after my presentation here tonight, you'll agree with me. And you'll see why I think that way. It's a lot more historical significance than the Wayside Inn. And a lot of people go, how could that be? But you'll find out tonight. Also, you know, a lot of people will say, oh geez, we lost the old railroad depot down on Lincoln and Mechanic Street. And I mean, that was historic, but it doesn't have the historic value that this property had for this city and the history of this city. And you'll find that out here tonight. So, before I get into the tavern itself, I just want to give you an idea about taverns in general. You know, people don't realize what a very important role they played in the development of our country. They were not only an integral part of society, but they were very, very essential. And travel and transportation back then in the 17th, 18th century required a tavern every few miles on the road, especially in the winter. If someone was trudging through in February and it was on horseback and it was a bad snowstorm out, if there wasn't a tavern every 6 or 8 miles, it could freeze to death. So, needless to say, they'd get to the tavern and go immediately in and sit next to the fire and have a hard cider. And maybe even something harder than that. And unbelievably, it was also necessary to have them near churches. And the reason for that back then was the churches, the meeting houses, were not heated. And back then, Sunday service would go all day long. And they'd take a refreshment break at noontime. So that people would all run over to the tavern. And the women would go into a dining room and they'd go to the big fireplace, like the one we have in the kitchen over here. And they'd fill up, they had portable foot warmers and they'd fill them back up with the hot coals. And they'd heat up potatoes, that they would put the hot potatoes in their pockets so they'd keep their hands warm, like that. And then they'd probably have a tea. Of course, the men were in the other part of the tavern, making themselves warm in a completely different way. So, and that's complete opposite of what it's like today. Today, you cannot have a liquor establishment within 500 feet of the church, and that's the law. You know, so you can't have one within 500 feet, but back then they wanted to have it right next door. So they served a number of functions, and they were a fundamental core of local and far travel news, government, commerce. You know, people traveling through, that you get news of what's going on in Boston or New York or wherever it might be. And they were used for a business boardroom, courts, courtrooms. You'll hear about Williams Tavern being used as a courtroom for many, many years. Most of the owners were Justice of Peace. The first one was a royal magistrate. So they were used, and they also had cells. They would keep prisoners. They were a place for tired drovers, people that drove their cattle and cows to market would stop there, and traveling tradesmen, what we call traveling salesmen, would stop there quite a bit. It was a place to swap news, hear stories, read broadsides, newspapers, and not the least, it was there to serve the thirsty needs of its paying customers. And boy, they were thirsty back then, like that. It was a place for local town people to come together and socialize, as well as share news. Additionally, it was a place they socialized and they played raffles, bet on cockfights, played cards, played a game called Farkle, which was a dice game, board games. Funny part of everything is that the research reveals that the average colonial consumed the unbelievable daily quantity of more than 3 gallons of alcoholic liquids a day. 3 gallons. 3 gallons. However, the alcoholic content was quite diluted compared to what it is today. There's still an awful lot of alcohol. They also played a crucial role in the development and government of the colonies. As I said earlier, circuit courts, location for the local militia headquarters. Militia used to advertise practices at the tavern. And if you showed up for the practice, you got free beer. Of course, those particular practices were quite full. I mean, everybody showed up for those. And there was also a place where political patriot groups such as the Sons of Liberty would meet to discuss the spirit of independence, political rumors, scouting, and spy missions, and ironically, plotting against the colony's mother country, England. So you can see the important role that taverns played in the overall development of our country. They were very, very essential back then for the needs of everybody, especially in the late 1600s. You can just imagine if someone like Abraham Williams, who built Williams Tavern, were able to come forward, I guess you could, in time and be here today and take a look, he wouldn't know what the heck to make of this, you know. Seeing 495 out here, I hear the traffic going up 495 and so forth, you know, it was just barren land. We were a frontier town back then. I mean a real frontier town. There weren't many other towns that were incorporated farther west of us. There were some that were settled, had a settler here, a settler there, but there wasn't anybody that was incorporated and large enough to be like a town. So we were definitely a frontier town. All right, everybody got their side up?
Everybody have theirs in the back?
Yep, all set, nice.
Okay.
Thank
I'm
you.
all set.
Okay. Everybody, also, you want more? Would you like to have a cup?
No, that's quite all right. I got the hard one. The very beginning started October 4th, 1663, when the town of Marlborough granted 34 acres to Lieutenant Abraham Williams. An upland piece of property next to the Great Pond on a very good, well-traveled road, which we know as Boston Post Road. It was called the Old Connecticut Park. It was called the King's Highway until after the Revolutionary War, and then it became the Boston Post Road. He constructed Williams Tavern somewhere around 1664. There's no exact dates of when he constructed it or an exact date that he opened, but he did open in 1665, the tavern. And it was for you know, the way he worded it, to feed man a beast. Because as I said, people would drive their cattle, cows, the bus and so forth, would come by there and stop, so he would have to feed them and the horses. So, in 1675, when we were on the verge of King Philip War, does everybody know what the King Philip War was? Anybody doesn't know what the King Philip War was? It was one of the bloodiest and worst wars that America ever fought. And considering, I mean, there was hardly not that many people, including the Indians, that lived in this area, and most of them got wiped out. So it was really, in numbers and percentage-wise, was probably the worst that America ever had. So the town people got nervous, and they voted to build garrisons and have 3 soldiers in each garrison. And Williams Tavern was named one of those garrisons, and had 3 soldiers placed in it and assigned to it. However, the Indians ended up attacking the town of Marlborough, and burning most of it to the ground, including Williams Tavern, on March 26, 1676. And he immediately rebuilt the tavern in 1677. And I just want to back up one bit. We know for sure about the 1665, thanks to a gentleman named Bob Seymour, who lives up in Silver Street. He's the nephew of Gus Seymour, who was the person who ripped down Williams Tavern, which you'll hear about later on. And they were able to save this placard over here of 1665 from the top of Williams Tavern. And he graciously let us use it tonight. He wanted to be here tonight, but he couldn't make it. So there's a picture, a side of it that he sent with it too that shows you could see the 1665 on top of it. So we know for a fact that it was built in 1665. That was on one thing that must have survived the burn, or either that Lieutenant Williams, when he rebuilt it, made that sign. So anyways, he rebuilt it. It's better than it was before, and had great plans for it. Lieutenant Williams passed away just before the end of 1712. And we passed it on to the second Abraham, who happened to be his grandson. He didn't have any sons, so he passed it on to his grandson. I shouldn't say he didn't have any sons. His son died, and so he couldn't pass it on to his son, so he passed it on to his son, Abraham, who was only 17 years old at the time, to take over this tavern. Well, second Abraham was very productive during his years there. He married 3 times, and he had a total of 17 children. 4 of them died early, a couple of them at childbirth, and a couple after a couple of months. And one of his wives died of dysentery, and a couple of the kids, their 19-year-old daughter did too. So he was productive, but he also went through some tough times during those years. And in June 21st of 1772, the first stagecoach rolled into Williams Tavern, which was monumental, because that really increased the business of the tavern. Besides the local people, now he was picking up the trade. It was one of 3 stops, and it was one of 2 stagecoach lines in America at that time. And, so Marlborough was one of 3 stops, and so he would get quite a few. You know, back then the passengers had to be very tough, let me tell you, because the roads were all rutted and terrible, and they'd have to get up early in the morning and travel 6, 8, 10 miles, whatever it might be, and make it to their destination, have something to eat, go to sleep, and get up 4 o'clock in the morning and keep going on. And you didn't get there in a day sometimes. If you were going from Boston to New York City, it took like 10 days to get there back then, of that type of travel. So they had to be a rough group to be able to do that, let me tell you. So they came through, and business really picked up. Now, this is where it gets really exciting. A lot of people, including past historians, missed it somehow or other and never realized that George Washington, he was General George Washington at the time, on his way to Cambridge to take charge of the Revolutionary troops, stopped there and slept there on July 2nd of 1775. Again, as I said, en route to Cambridge to take charge of the troops, and he slept there. And before I get on to the Abraham Dine, I just want to give you how I found this out and how I back up my claim to that. This up here is Washington's travels in New England. It's a chronological itinerary done by this gentleman, Charles Eugene Claiborne. And it was done through, abstracted from the volumes of his diaries, of his writings, expense accounts, and so forth. And they all show that on that night, which is right here, he lodged at the tavern, built in 1676, it says, instead of 77, in Marlborough, of which in 1677, Lieutenant Williams placed a sign, Williams Tavern. And so he goes on to say how he did lodge there and sleep there. This here is an article from 1936 on the reopening of historic Williams Tavern, which when we get up to that era, I'll be covering a little bit further. But down the bottom here, you'll see, and you can come look at it later on, it talks about the treasures that are left, that are in the tavern, and it talks about the bed that Washington slept in is still there, intact. Now, where that is today, no one knows. Anyway, I don't know who knows. You know, we have one piece of furniture from Williams Tavern, it's right over here, this chair. The chair was bought by a dentist from Hudson in auction, it says, at an auction at Williams Tavern. We'll find out later on, when we get towards the end, the very end of Williams Tavern, about that. And, but we don't know what happened to all the furnishings and everything else in Williams Tavern. It's a shame, it's sad, it's very, very sad that we don't. So, but that, just to show you that, that it was indeed proof that he did sleep there. He did, in 1775, he also obtained the rank of colonel and led a regiment in the Revolutionary War. Now, so far, both of these Williamses were very, very involved in the town. They were selectmen, they were assessors. This one here even was a royal magistrate, which was like a justice of the peace or a judge. So they were very, very involved with town government, both Abrahams. Abraham passed away on July 10th, 1781, leaving the tavern. A blank on there somehow. I probably drew a blank when we were doing it.
Drew a blank.
1781 to 1813, the last 32 years of Williams Tavern, as we called it, Williams Tavern. His son, Captain George Williams, took it over, and why he picked George is, I don't know, because he had so many sons. He had 9 sons, so why he picked George, they don't really say. But anyways, when he took it over, he lost my place there. I did draw a blank. He was the 10th child of Abraham when he took it over upon his father's death. He was 45 years old, much unlike his father, who was 17 when he took over the tavern. So, anyways, this is kind of reversed chronologically, so I'll go with what was chronologically. This was the year that a lot of historians have in their history books and everything, that President Washington stopped at the tavern and dined there. He was president for about 6 months, and he decided he wanted to tour the New England colonies, the New England states. He toured them all but Rhode Island, because Rhode Island hadn't ratified it yet, so he went to Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and toured all around. And he did stop at the tavern because he had been there before, and he knew, you know, he must have liked it. He slept there, so he came back and dined there, and he was greeted by a group of horsemen that, from Marlborough that came out and greeted him and brought him to the tavern, and then he was met at the tavern by some of the state officials who brought him further on into Boston, where he had to meet with the governor and so forth. So he did come there again. Now, there has been a couple historians in my research that I found saying that he was also there in 1756, but I have found no proof of that. No proof whatsoever. He was a colonel in the army, and something about the French and Indian Wars or something, that he was coming up to Massachusetts to discuss. But I have seen nothing that verifies that. It wasn't in any of his chronicles, any of his diaries, or anything like that would prove that. So I don't believe that's true. Another famous individual at the time was a French nobleman I hope I get this right, by the way, otherwise my French-speaking wife will let me know. The Duke de Rochefoucauld. Did I say it right? Rochefoucauld. 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 Rochefoucauld.
That's what I call him.
Have a name like that. He stopped there because he was ill. He was very, very sick, and he stopped there, and he was there for 5 days. And the Williams family took care of him. And he was very, very appreciative of that. And he spoke very highly, and in his writings, he talked very highly about the family, how they, had a business to run, but yet they took such good care of him. When he left them his sword and some other memorabilia that they had in that article I was showing you earlier about the bed. Talks about that sword they had on the wall and the other memorabilia that they had. So that too is gone off into somewhere.
You stayed here for 2 years straight?
No, he didn't stay for 2 years, he stayed for 5 days.
Oh, 5 days, okay.
Did I say 2 years?
I'm looking at dates, it's on.
Oh, no, those dates, that's the time frame that Captain George Williams ran Williams Tavern.
The down one.
Oh, down here, oh, I'm sorry, no, it's somewhere in between.
Oh, okay.
They didn't have a definitive date when he stayed there. I'm sorry, I should have pointed that out. But there was no definitive date exactly when he stayed there. So, but he spoke very highly. He was a writer and a French nobleman. And he was here doing investigations. But I don't know. He was doing investigations.
Why about the big dig?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
They were studying the American experiment,
Oh, okay.
okay, and there were French scholars were coming over to see, how come this is working? This one feels better known, but that would make sense that he can do it.
Yeah, does. Thank you. Anyway, George didn't have any boys, he had girls. And one of them married Silas Gates. All right? And it was under Silas Gates that, under his ownership, that it reached its highest point of most prosperity and so forth. He was a real entrepreneur. He was very frugal, very tight, very, very religious, and he ran a tight ship, I guess you could say. And he went out and bought all kinds of acreage because he could see that between the stagecoach and then also the drovers were driving their cattle, was getting to be more and more driving their cattle and so forth to Boston, needed some place where they could put up those cattle for a day or two to rest them and for them to rest before they moved on into Boston. So down, if you go down by Jericho Ski Hill, down that whole area, he owned hundreds of acres down in there. And they would put the cattle out in pastures down there. And the drovers then would stay up at the tavern. So he made money by renting the pasture for them and then renting rooms for the drovers. So he was very, very entrepreneurial and ahead of his time, very, very smart. And what he did do, he realized after a while that a lot of buildings were burning. They were old wooden buildings. And he was getting somewhat nervous. So in June of 1822, he raised the old original Williams Tavern, the wooden one, unfortunately. And he rebuilt it in 4 months' time, the new brick one, as you see in the photos here. It would be this one, it would be this one here, right there. You'll see it, you can come look at them after, but then later on I'll talk to you about how they're large. But he built it out of brick, just like the Three Little Pigs, I guess you could say, you know. He built it out of brick. He wanted to make sure it was secure, so which was smart. But as I said, it really prospered under him. He did change the name to the Gates House. So 150 years of Williams Tavern were all over, and it became the Gates House at that time.
It was nearby here, wasn't it? Williams Tavern, not too far from here.
Yeah, not too far from here, but there's a map up here you can look at after. But he died at the age of 70 in 1828, and it was prior to doing that, he turned over the management to his son Abraham, who learned very well from his father, very, very well indeed. And he kept it going just as his father did. And he had no children. He was married to Elizabeth Brigham. Some woman had called me today, there was a Brigham. Is she here today? No, I guess not, I guess she didn't make it, but she thought she had some relative, you know, she was also into genealogy, and I know there's quite a few people here into genealogy, that she wanted to really try to find out, because she had heard that one of her ancestors was something to do with Williams Tavern. I'm going to read to you just a couple quick things here. That one is from the, we were fortunate enough to get the diary of Dr. Edward Forbes Barnes' memoirs. He was born in 1809. He was a great-grandson of Richard Barnes, who came to this country on the ship Jonathan in 1639, settled in Sudbury, and came to Marlborough around 1657 to 1660, and lived on Clover Hill Road. All right. So when he was young, he was around 17, he used to walk over and go to and work at Gates Tavern, at the Gates house at the time. And he wrote some of these things, I'll just share them with you, there really isn't that much. He would talk about the year or so, year and a half that he stayed there and worked to help make money for his family. Droves of cattle on their way to Brighton stopped there on Friday and Saturday nights, and we had to hire men, had lots of metal hay to cut for them, all over the cattle yard. Heavy teams from the western part of the state stopped every day. 2 stages from Springfield and Northampton came down every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and up from Boston at 6 o'clock the next morning, where the passengers took breakfast. The accommodation stage, Daniel Haskell, the driver for many years, came down on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and back from Boston the next day at 2 p.m., where the passengers had dinner. This household consisted of 10 or 11 persons. The old gentleman and wife, Mr. and Mrs. Silas Gates, Abraham Gates, his son and wife, 3 hired men in the summer, Otis Moss, A. Brigham, I don't know, myself, and Billy Moore, the hostler, whose business it was to take care of the stage horses. There were also 2 female help, Mary Rice and Harriet Maynard, whose wages were $1 a week, and a washerwoman, Mrs. Eva Rice, on Mondays. In the wintertime, we had to be early risers in order to be in readiness for the stages at 6 a.m. When they came full of passengers and dined on breakfast, the old man was always pleased, and the men could depend upon it that he would be agreeable throughout the day. If they came empty, we could not depend upon the old man's smile, but must expect a word of fault finding. Mr. Silas Gates had a face of vermilion, was a first-rate landlord, scrupulously honest, but close to a half a cent. That meant he was close to his money. Abraham, his son, was more hardy and impervious and fond of big words. He, like his father, this is interesting, he, like his father, too early got the taste of liquor, which caused him a good many fits of sickness. One other article, I'm not sure who it was written by, some woman that was doing a story about the Main Street and Boston Post Road and so forth, but she remembers going down, this was done way back around 1900, and she remembers as a child always going over there. She loved going over there, and she talks about the family always dined a little before 12 o'clock so as to be in readiness to wait upon the travelers. We ate in a large kitchen, a large open fireplace with brick oven on one side with its large red settle, S-E-T-T-L-E, drawn up. The floor very white and sanded. Excuse me, every part of the house was as neat as wax. Old Mr. Silas Gates and Mrs. Arnold belonged to the family. We used to think it a great treat to roam over the house. In the attic were rooms with either 3 or 4 beds with no other furniture. that I can remember, except a stand and a chair or two maybe. There were 2 dining rooms, one large and one small one. The halls and stairs always looked so nice in their fresh paint. There were very few carpets in the house. The back rooms, washrooms, and dairy were a perfect marvel. Also neat and clean, and so much work being done. They always kept American help, who lived with them for years. We used to like to play in the old coach that was in one of the many barns. In the garden on the back of the house were many old-fashioned flowers, and it goes on and on describing berries and bushes of all kinds of berries and other stuff. It was like a land flowing with milk and honey, both out of doors and within. So it must have been an exciting place for back then for these people to write those words. Dr., as I said, Edward Forbes Barnes went on to be a prominent doctor here in Marlborough. He went to, when he left here, he went on to Harvard. If you kept reading his memoirs, he talks about how he got inspired to learn Latin and other things and to further educate himself. He went on to Harvard and became in medical school and became a doctor. So there is a lot of history there too. So Abraham, when he took over, he died at 54 years of age, very young compared to some of the others. He had no children, but he was very, very wealthy, as I said. How wealthy was he? I don't see Sue Brigham here tonight, but Sue, we have his copy of his will, and Sue cataloged the whole thing. Might be kind of hard to read from back where you are, but I'll try to go over it for you so you'll have an idea what I'm talking about here. He owned, as I said, hundreds and hundreds of acres of property. This here is just his real estate. He had land in Holden, he spelled it G-I-N at the time, Boylston Farm. He even had lots in Cedar, Crane Cedar Swamp. I don't know how many acres, because some of these it doesn't say, but some of them does. 45 acres on each side of the road, 32 and a half, 25, 45 acres, and so forth. So I would assume he probably had 300 to 500 acres of land. The total value of the land alone was worth almost $19,000. Then, here's all the inventory and personal belongings, the furnishings and everything. Further on, and I didn't put it all in here, but further on in the will, it lists all the furnishings. The chairs, the tables, everything, the linens, the whole thing. The total of all this was worth 20 notes that he had were alone $18,000. He was like a banker too. He acted as a banker. His total estate was worth just shy of $42,000, $41,999. Back then, there was a lot of money. Now I'm going to show you. I was very interested in this. What this would be worth in today's value. Whoop, there it goes.
It's worth a ripoff.
So I went online and I Googled that, and it's to measure someone's worth in today's value, they use as an example the following. Warren Buffett was worth $52 billion in 2007. J.D. Rockefeller was worth $1.4 billion when he died in 1937. The question is how economically powerful they are can be best measured by their wealth is compared to the economy they lived in.
Yes.
All right? This is measured by the share of the GDP, the gross domestic product, which is the best method to measure relative worth. So that would make J.D. Rockefeller in 2008 worth $210 billion. Wow. Far exceeding Warren Buffett, $52 billion. So I took the $42,000 and put that in, and using the same formula, he would have been worth $651 million at 42,000 in today's money. So you can see how successful he was for back then, compared to some of the other people that probably lived in the town. He was one of the wealthiest, probably the wealthiest one that lived here. So we could put this down just like the economy. Now, who got it?
Yeah.
Who got it?
It wasn't me, I can tell you. Was it you, Benny?
Mr. Chair.
Now, for you genealogists out here,
Oh, my goodness.
is the family tree on the Gates family. There was also another entrepreneur in this overall Gates family, and he's right down here on the
Oh,
bottom.
wow, yeah, okay.
William Bill Gates, Microsoft Bill. Now, I don't know what you would call him, because he's on this side. Stephen and Ann Gates came to America, landed in Hingham in 1638. They moved to Sudbury, Marlborough area. You gotta remember, back then, Marlborough was huge. Where they lived was is now Hudson, but it was Marlborough back then. And they had some children, they had some girls too, but Thomas and Elizabeth Gates, Simon and Margaret Gates. Thomas and Simon were the boys. They married Elizabeth and Margaret. This side here is where Silas, the owner of the Gates house, side that he's on. This side comes down to Bill Gates, Microsoft Bill.
It's in the blood,
Huh? It's in the blood.
Oh, yeah, it's a blood relation.
It's a blood.
That's where the money went.
That's what he got his start from over here. Maybe that's where the money came from. I don't really know. But
That's interesting.
I did this, not even looking into it for Williams Tavern at Gates House, but I was also researching Gates Academy, which both Silas and Abraham and Silas's brother, they donated money to start Gates Academy, which none of you know where Gates Academy was. You know where the Walker Building is on Main Street. It was down there. It was in the early 1800s. It was built. It was a lot of people think it was torn down in the 1860s, but I don't think it was torn down because I believe it was moved. It was said that it was moved. And Jack shaking his head because we've been still researching this. But if anybody knows where Attorney Gadboy's and Bergeron's office is, the house that sits behind that, it's a yellow house that faces Washington Street, I believe is the old Gates Academy. Because in 1860, they tore down, the Gates Academy was built by the Masons. And they wanted a place for young men to learn, and also they wanted a meeting hall. So they had a meeting hall, and then they also had the academy. So you gotta think back to 1820s. The academy didn't have 200 students. It had about maybe 8 or 10 students. So it didn't need a very big place. Plus they had the hall that they built for the Masons to hold their meetings. So I believe that what happened in 1860 was they tore the hall down. In some places in history, they talk about it was moved over behind Dr. Campbell's house, which is the attorney's house building right there now. So that's why I believe. The only thing is history likes to throw you off track all the time, let me tell you. And they give you numbers back then of the house numbers. Well, all my research, I can't find that house number. Like it's non-existent. But everything, the maps I researched at the Registry of Deeds and everything, really proves to me anyways that that's the house, that yellow house that's there. And they used it for a tenement house.
Bob, the gazebo that was in front of Gates Academy was moved down on Maple Street and it was
Yeah.
used as a gas station.
Yeah.
They really reused
Yeah.
buildings.
So, anyways, the Gates gave $1,000 each, so you could see $1,000 was a lot of money back then. Went a long way to building an academy. So, all right. Okay, what happened after that, in the years 1829 to 1871, after Abraham died, his widow took it over, Elizabeth. However, she knew nothing about really running it. So she had her brother-in-law, who had married her sister, come in to manage it. And he managed it until he died in 1862. This is the start of the downfall of the prosperity at Williams Tavern, the Gates House, right in this time frame. And it's because of the railroads. All right? The railroad, the first railroad came to Marlborough on January 1st, 1855. And of course, it came in down the main street down there, and where Marlborough Savings Bank is now. And Williams Tavern was out here. So it didn't help them. And then as time progressed and more people started traveling by trains, and there were more stations and more lines and so forth, there were less people using stagecoaches and traveling over land and so forth. And that was the start of the downfall of the prosperity at the house. And, you know, just like everything else, you know, everything starts getting modernized, and next thing you know, you're out of business, I guess you could say. I'm not even going to get into this part, but Elizabeth died. The tavern was left to Deacon Phelps, who she had married. Now, Deacon Phelps, I don't know how he did this, but he married 3 sisters.
All at the same time?
And
He didn't have to break in a mother-in-law.
he ended up
That's why they call him the.
he ended up marrying her, and then her sister after that and so forth. But he held, after she passed away in 1862, somehow or other, and there's really no record of it, he ran the tavern. How, I don't know. He was a deacon at the second meeting house, the West Meeting House, I believe it was. And, he was a clergyman, so he wasn't really involved in running taverns, but he did know how to get wives, though, that's for sure. And he kept it in the family. He kept it till 1871, and a fellow by the name of Walter Layton bought it at auction for $4,200, all right, back then in 1871. In 1883, he had it, as you can see, he must have had in mind if he was going to sell it. He added the top floor that I was talking about, which is up here. You can come take a look at pictures after, but it's almost like he raised up one more floor up. And he increased it at the time from 28 rooms to 36 rooms, thinking this will help my business, and you know, maybe we'll start prospering and so forth. But as I said earlier, they were on the downswing. You know, there were getting to be more and more roads, more and more railroads. People weren't coming by as much. It was getting harder and harder to rely on local to come in and drink and eat and so forth. So, but he's the one that added the top floor to it. Now we go through a period of time where we go through an awful lot of owners, as you can see. I only list them just because there's really nothing to say about them. So nothing really happened during this time at the Gates House of Williams Tavern. Henry Carr owned it from 1902 to 1909. Fred Welsh, no, I'm sorry, Carr owned it from 1884 to 1902. Fred Welsh from 1902 to 1909. We go on and on and on. You can see the different owners that keep going on. No one can make it. And now I'm down to months in here. You know, I'm putting months down up here. This was 8 months here for Josephine Griffin. And then Bosner and Cura, they had it for, what, 8 months or something like that. Then it goes back to Josephine Griffin. She was carrying the mortgage on it, I guess. It went back to her. Then it went to George Bicknell. He held it for at least 2.5 years. You know. Then finally, it ends up back in the Williams. Now, I've been trying to find out, and I haven't been able to find out if he is a descendant of the original Williams. It seems like that he could be. Why was he so interested? He came from Boston. He came out here, and he put a lot into this. As you can see, he owned it for quite a while. He also spent $25,000 renovating it. I'll just read off some of the things that he did here that he put into the place. Put all new electrical lights in there. He put a new, built the ballroom in the back that you can see here from one of Paul Pawlowski's pictures here. The old barn that was in back, he made it into a ballroom, thinking that he would be able to get functions and so forth, and that would help him, help the business. Modernized it, a lot of other different things. A lot of new, as he calls them, modern comforts for the time. You know, so the floor, he polished it in hardwood, decorations, and keeping with the general tone of the tavern furniture. So he spent quite a bit of money, and he spent quite a bit of money printing a brochure that he had, that he distributed to try to get business up and going. He reopened in 1916, not too long after he had bought it. He bought it, I think he paid something just under $10,000 for it. And he put in $25,000, so even then, that $35,000 for 1915 was a lot of money. Especially when you hear what happens towards the end. But he opened then, and he too was an uphill battle for him. But he was trying to keep it going. Again, it leads me to believe that maybe you got something there.
I just had a brainstorm because I'm waiting to get up to speak to the crowd myself, because I can put a very personal touch on the Williams Tavern, since my grandfather and grandmother and my mother and her sister lived there. Get to this because I think his competition was the Pine Grove Inn. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm
Well, that was my
that.
grandfather.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is a story that I've been dying to tell. And I want to start with this little letter that I have here. I've been just putting together the little bits that I have, and I must start out with this letter that I found today. And I hadn't looked at it for a long time, and so I said to my husband, I'm going to wear my mother's cameo tonight. So she had left me this beautiful note that I hadn't read since, I don't know, 20 years. So I'm sitting at the table eating my chicken pie saying, to my dear Lolly, all right, this cameo was given to me in, figure this out, 1916 by a Miss Nellie Williams of the Williams Tavern, Marlborough, Mass., who was at least 45 years of age at that time. She was the lady who influenced my parents to let me become a Catholic. She used to take me to Mass every morning when I was about 3 years old. Say a prayer for her once in a while. This is Nicole, that's my daughter. When you're through with it, love, Mom. P.S. It is hoped that it will remain forever in our family.